Thank you. It's my honor to introduce Mr. Gene Sperling, our next speaker this afternoon. Thank you, Gene, for joining us today. Gene Sperling is the only person to have served as National Economic Advisor and Director of the National Economic Council for 2 presidents. President Clinton in 1996 through 2001, and President Obama in 2011 through 2014. He currently is an outside economic advisor to Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, which he also advised in 2008. During the Obama administration, Mr. Sperling served as the White House point person for several of the president's top economic priorities, including manufacturing policy. Sperling was named co-chair of the White House Office of Manufacturing Policy and led the creation of the new manufacturing hubs, or the National Network for Manufacturing Innovation, as well as the launch of the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership Steering Committee 2.0, a renewed cross-sector national effort to secure U.S. leadership in the emerging technologies to create high-quality manufacturing jobs and enhance America's global competitiveness. During the financial crisis, Mr. Sperling served as a member of President Obama's Auto Task Force and advocated for the rescue of Chrysler. Mr. Sperling is the founder and former director of the Center of Universal Education at Brookings, which focuses on education for girls and boys in poor and conflict-ridden nations. He is a former senior fellow at both the Council on Foreign Relations and the Center for American Progress. He is the author of Pro-Growth, Progressive, and Economic Strategy for Shared Prosperity and What Works in Girls' Education, Evidence of the World's Best Investment. Mr. Sperling was a consultant for NBC's West Wing for 4 seasons and shared writing credit for 4 episodes. A native of Ann Arbor, Michigan, he is married to Allison Abner, a television writer, and they have 2 children. Thank you very much, Mr. Sperling.
Well, thank you, Gil. Thanks for putting together this great conference. I always like to have the West Wing TV show mentioned because inevitably in Washington, D.C., people are way, way more impressed that you worked for the fake West Wing for 4 years than that you worked for the real West Wing for 11 years. So always want to get that in there. That is how I met my wife. I went for the interview that first day. It was a very memorable day. I got to the to Warner Brothers. I'd never been there. I'd only seen it in like the movie Blazing Saddles when they break through there. And so it was exciting. I get right to the door and they say, we're sorry, phone rings and says, Adam Sorkin will not be able to meet with you today. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I just came from DC to Los Angeles. They said, oh no, he didn't mean to. He was arrested yesterday for bringing illegal mushrooms through the security at Las Vegas. He says, but don't worry, we're going to have you meet with all the writers in the commissary, and Brad Whitford, who plays Josh Lyman, was going to come too. So I was a little stunned by that news. I came in, I went to the commissary, and I sat down, and sure enough, Brad Whitford was on my right, and a first-year writer on the show, Allison Abner, was on my left, and that's how I met my wife. So the West Wing has been very good to my professional and cause life, and the fake West Wing has been very good to my personal life. So, anyways, I'm glad to be here talking on manufacturing. I'm glad to see the passion, the interest in this. And I'm, no secret, I'm advising Secretary Clinton and, worked very hard on her agenda. We had some great help from a lot of people you might know, like Leo Gerard, who was here earlier today, who was a big help and advised us. That was even before they endorsed, but he personally was very involved, as was Sherrod Brown, Senator Sherrod Brown and his staff, and Ron Bloom and Michael Wessel and others. So, I think this is extremely important. And let me, I guess, start, and it's hard to kind of come in at this point because I don't know all the things that have been said. But I think one of the things that I felt in 2011 as I became NEC director that hit me right at the beginning as we announced a greater focus was that, to be quite honest, we got some critiques from economists, even on the progressive side. And I thought the critiques were unfounded, but what I thought mostly I did not like about the critiques is it seemed to suggest that there was an economic consensus around this kind of focus, and that this type of focus on manufacturing must be for other than kind of pure and rigorous economic reasons. And I have felt since then that it is very important for those of us who believe in a strong manufacturing policy to ground it in the economic case for why manufacturing, and particularly for why manufacturing location is important, why it matters. And I think, so, you know, when I try to look at like where the critique comes from, it is very much built on kind of a false paradigm. It is a bit knocking down straw men or strong people, straw people, straw men, arguments that either are wrong or that's an outdated old paradigm that's not even what people like myself, and I imagine many people here are arguing for. I think that kind of old paradigm rests on kind of three positions. One is that any type of manufacturing focus is industrial policy where you're picking winners. You know, so this is the false idea that the government, people in the government can sit around a table and outguess the market of who's going to be winners and try to get behind that. And so it's inherently distortionary. It's going to be inherently wrong. It's an argument that kind of assumes we're all like the guy who whispers into Dustin Hoffman's ear in The Graduate, plastics. And, you know, we're not going to get it right. And so this doesn't make sense. The second kind of part of this kind of, I think, outdated critique is inevitability. You know, even if you could make a case, there's some argument for wanting to have manufacturing, you can't control it. This is the inevitable decisions of individual market actors of which there is no legitimate or tangible government role that would make economic sense. And the third, which you hear a bit, is the silent factory critique, which is, you know, people say, well, I went to this Intel factory, you could barely hear something, I barely saw workers. So your vision that manufacturing is a big job creator is defied by the idea that factories are being automated, they're quiet, they're silent. And this is the critique that is often used to suggest that the entire endeavor is misguided. So I think that at least if we're going to have this debate, let's have the debate on the right terms. Let's have the debate on what I would consider the new paradigm, or at least the paradigm which those of us who defend manufacturing policy rest our case. So first, I don't think any of us in the Obama administration or in the Clinton campaign who are looking at a strong manufacturing policy are thinking about it as like trying to outpredict the market, picking winners and losers, that stuff. I think it is much more on the solid footing of whatever you'd like to call it, on positive externalities, innovation spillover impacts, the basic economic logic that there are some investments that have a larger public good and benefit that no individual actor is going to be able to internalize the benefits from. And so therefore, without public policy, individual private market actors will underinvest in what would be best for the country. Now, what's interesting to me is that while there is this critique on the manufacturing side, there is widespread acceptance of this logic for investing in research and development, research and experimentation, and innovation. In those areas, people from a very more classic economic model see that there are positive innovation spillovers and that it makes sense for us to have an R&D tax credit or other things that encourage. And yet, that it is that logic, economic logic fundamentally, that absolutely justifies a focus on manufacturing and manufacturing policy. Now, everybody here has probably heard, knows the basic arguments of why manufacturing punches above its weight on most of the things that we think have positive innovation spillover effects. 12% of GDP, but 70% of private sector R&D, 60% of R&D employees, 90% or 75 to 90% of U.S. exports. I think the data still shows that manufacturing creates higher paying jobs and creates higher paying jobs often for people who don't have four-year college degrees than they would get otherwise. And so I think there are this logic. And this is well grounded in several studies. The 2010 study by Greenstone, Horbeck, and Moretti looked at communities and basically found that when a major manufacturing plant came into another area, it increased the productivity of other manufacturing plants in the same place. In other words, the productivity of the surrounding firms improved 12% compared to a comparable community that did not receive new production, what they called agglomeration spillovers. An American Economic Review study by Wolfgang Keller examining manufacturing R&D in 14 countries over 25 years found that spillover benefits from that activity declined with distance by more than 50% when they are more than 700 miles away. So it is not just supporting U.S. manufacturers whose headquarters are here, it is supporting the location of manufacturing in the United States that is tied by economic studies to positive spillover effects beyond the benefit that that individual company would get. Lee Brandstetter, who was at the CA and worked with us, is back at Carnegie Mellon now, was known for investigating the benefits of the U.S. and Japan and found the exact same thing, that the benefits were international. They stayed within the country, primarily where the location took place. The other reason that you see this in the economic literature, and MIT, I assume probably they are represented, the PI initiative here today, was the notion that of the interdependence between production and innovation. And this is their quote, "Learning takes place as engineers and technicians on the factory floor come back with their problems to the design engineers and struggle with them to find better resolutions. Learning takes place as users come back with problems." This is the famous kind of Bell Labs theorem that, that you want to house thinkers and doers under one roof. And very much of their conclusion of their study concluded exactly that this type of benefits from having production, design, supply chains in one place was very significant. Again, making the economic case not just for manufacturing, but the location of manufacturing in the United States. The former MIT president, Susan Hockfield, said on the crux, "The loss of manufacturing not only destroys manufacturing jobs, it saps our inventive advantage." Now, the second part, critique, which is related to this, is that, well, even if you could convince me that this was optimal, there's really no role for the United States government. These are, manufacturing goes as the process of globalization and the process of automation, and this is just a natural and inevitable decline, and there's nothing that government can do. Again, I think that the literature is extremely solid in rebuking that claim. I think the Pisano and Shea, the Harvard Business School professors, their description of an industrial commons, the R&D and manufacturing infrastructure, know-how, process development skills, engineering capability in firms, universities, and other organizations that provides the foundation for growth and innovation in a wide range of industries. So, simply put, the interesting thing I always found about this was that the one part of our government that was kind of aware of this industrial commons, I really always thought was the defense industry. I mean, they knew that when you change from a weapon to another weapon, that if you let the entire supply base erode and people go off and do different things, you would be weaker. Yet this logic that was so clear to people on the defense side somehow is defied by often traditional economic analysis on the importance of these, of the webs. And I think, you know, if I was teaching on this, I would teach, you know, 2 case studies. I would teach consumer electronics versus autos. I imagine that as the decline of consumer electronics took place in our country and nobody particularly worried about it or thought it was legitimate to try to strengthen our manufacturing base there was probably a thought, well, it doesn't really matter. Consumer electronics as we know them today can be done cheaper elsewhere. Well, what happens? We learn later that consumer electronics from the iPhone and up are one of the biggest explosions of manufacturing and value added in the world. And where are we? With a completely eroded supply base, in no position to attract the benefits. And again, this is, to attract location here. And this was, again, made, I think, very strongly both by Pisano and Shi in another study by Delgado, Porter, and Stern. So if you look at one end, consumer electronics, where we let the supply base completely erode, and then we're not in a position to take advantage of the new opportunities, auto provides the counter side. I mean, when we were coming into office in the administration, the Bush CEA before us had already predicted that the financial crisis would see 1 million lost jobs auto-related. 1 million lost jobs. Since GM and Chrysler went into bankruptcy, we are up about 700,000 jobs. But we're not just up 700,000 jobs. The U.S. auto industry, whether it moves to self-driving cars or whether it moves to something else, nobody doesn't think that we are in a position to take advantage of that. And that was specific government action to decide that an auto industry and the web of suppliers in the auto industry was important to our manufacturing base and was more important regardless of what the individual actors thought was best in their self-interest. For our long-term interest, were we going to position ourselves to be in a situation where we were going to still compete in steel, in auto parts, in auto, and in the products of the future that we couldn't pick or imagine, but where at least we were positioned. And if there was like a teaching moment that should tell you this, it would be the moment that Ford CEO Alan Mulally testified on the Hill. Every single person who took microeconomics in high school or college, had you taken an exam and they said there are 3 big players in an industry, 3 dominant players in an industry, what would happen to company 1 if company 2 and 3 went out of business? If you didn't answer that stuff would be honky-dory cool for company 1, you certainly would not have gotten a good grade because they would have taken all the market share. They would have had probably higher rents, greater pricing power. And so yet Alan Mulally comes up to the Hill and argues for the rescue of GM and Chrysler. And his quote, and I want to give his quote. He said the immediate and ongoing risk, he recognized the immediate ongoing risk to Ford, stating at the time, quote, "We believed that if GM and Chrysler would have gone into free fall bankruptcy, they would have taken down the supply base. They would have taken the supply base down and taken the industry down, plus maybe turned the U.S. recession into a depression. I mean, that is a teaching moment of what is the core challenge in manufacturing, which is to have the web of capacity, skills, supply base that is important for anyone in that industry. And the idea that that was so important that he wanted to see the rescue of his two main competitors is a tremendous teaching moment in what I think are the right economics of manufacturing. So the third myth is the silent factory. Manufacturing jobs are hopelessly lost forever. Well, you know, I think as Rob Scott, EPI has mentioned, others, you know, actually things were fairly flat at about 17 million for a long time. It was not inevitable, and a lot of it probably had to do with events in the last decade, with China, with a failure of enforcement in our in the Bush administration. But whatever the case is, it is hard to make the case that it was absolutely inevitable. But the other problem with it is the idea that when you're judging manufacturing jobs, you just look in the big factory. And here again, I think the data, rigorous data, is strong. McKinsey estimates, you know, 5.7 million jobs in integrated manufacturing supply chains that are not counted in the numbers. Research by Ready shows manufacturing jobs support 1.6 jobs outside of manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, 5 jobs across the economy as a result. EPI and Scott look and think there are 12 million direct manufacturing, but another 15 million that rely are connected to manufacturing, so that it's a total of 27 million. So again, the just knee-jerk economic analysis of inevitable decline or jobs are not relevant are, again, I think, contradicted by a more sophisticated look at the supply chain, at jobs that may have been classically counted as manufacturing but are now perhaps done somewhere else, somewhere in the supply chain where they may be classified as services, or it might be ambiguous. So, obviously, what should we do going forward? I think that let me mention, I think, 5 or 6 things that I think you see in the Hillary Clinton agenda. One is a very strong "Make It in America" strategy. It is a strategy that does build off some of the things we tried to do, more finding with existing money, the national network, the innovation hubs, advanced manufacturing innovation hubs, the other, you know, the legislation that has passed so far. But I think our view is, you know, we would sit there in the administration and see just tremendous partnerships being put together, and heartbreak as one place was chosen. And you had to ask yourself, why the hell are we not funding every good innovation hub partnership? Why are we choosing one? It just was not, it was just a lack of resources, a lack of will to provide those resources. So in her putting forward a proposal, she wanted to put forward $10 billion. And $10 billion, I think, allows not only the ability to cover all of the kind of more advanced manufacturing innovation hubs that have been going through the process in the Obama administration, but I think a broader type of innovation partnerships too, that are not just based on the advanced manufacturing processes, but anything that helps an industry and their supply chain be more competitive. And I think that's one of the points that both Leo Gerard and Sherrod Brown have made, and that Sherrod has had in his legislation, is that we want to broaden the concept. Now that we can legislate, we can broaden so that it can cover modernizing, making more competitive traditional manufacturing industries, and not just in the super cool world of 3D printing and other forms of advanced manufacturing. That is what can be done when we actually have a strong Make It in America strategy. And I give a hat tip to Steny Hoyer and Pelosi and all of those who have long pushed Make It in America as a good name for an overall strategy, what Secretary Clinton was happy to adopt. Secondly, there's just no question that trade enforcement on manufacturing has to have just a dramatically higher emphasis. And I think, I mean, obviously there's a lot of focus on what the standards for trade agreements are, and there's no question that Secretary Clinton is raising the bar significantly on what would be an acceptable trade agreement. And she's come out against TPP. I know there's disagreement probably in this room on that issue, but she feels very much that when we're making this type of effort, of multilateral agreement, this type of congressional effort, it needs to be something that is just unambiguously going to be a plus for manufacturing jobs in the United States. And her view is that this does not meet that bar. Even the estimates on manufacturing, concerns over whether the rule of origin rules in the TPP provide too much of a hole for China to get in, again, an issue Senator Brown has made, and whether or not there is enough to really take on the kind of currency manipulation that has obviously hurt manufacturing jobs in the United States significantly over the last 15 years. And I think that it is very important that this signal be sent very strongly to China, and very important that they understand that this is not, if you're listening, this is not just the election year talk. This will be the policy of the Hillary Clinton administration. I think one of the worst things that happened in the 90s was after the work was done to get an anti-surge protection against China, the 421 agreement. That was to say that if there are painful surges to manufacturing jobs in the United States, that you would not have a high burden of proof to stop those, that you could do it just by the impact that it had. This was important enough that it probably held up the WTO agreement for 6 or 7 months. And yet, at a time when they were slowly flooding in manufacturing jobs, 6 different times the 421 case was raised. 6 different times the Bush administration said no. Now, you could look and say, well, that was harmful to wire hangers and iron waterworks and circular steel pipe and pedestal actuators that were hurt by that. But the harm goes way beyond. That was just a complete signal to China that there was not going to be any enforcement, that there was virtually nothing that you would do that would make the administration trigger any type of enforcement. That kind of signal is extremely harmful. I thought the fact that you didn't have one 421 ever used until Barack Obama did on steel tires in 2009 is to me just, you know, one of the most unfortunate things in the last 12, 14 years for manufacturing. And so I think it's going to be very important for a President Clinton to make very clear that this is not going to be something that goes away, that this is going to be a big effort, and there's going to be very tough enforcement. And I think that means on the just dramatic amount of intellectual property theft. I think that means pushing even harder at the U.S. level bilaterally, but at the G20 level for even harder enforcement of the excess capacity in subsidies in steel that are hurting steel, hurting the auto industry and other places. And I think this comes quickly. And I think that China is has to know that being labeled a market economy, what's the American Express, ad, membership has its responsibilities. And currency manipulation, dramatic subsidizing of excess capacity in steel that hurt our workers, hurt other global workers, currency manipulation, intellectual property theft, is not part of the formula that gets one the recognition of market economy. And I realize that that will create some friction, but that's friction that we need to have to send China the right message on, and the world, on our commitment on manufacturing enforcement. And I also think that it will mean looking more often at self-initiation by the government of cases, particularly where you have American companies who fear retaliation if they bring the cases themselves. So I think we need, number one, the strong manufacturing location strategy, the strong Make it in America, reshore in America strategy, a strategy that focuses on location, on the innovation benefits of investments in strong webs of capacity for manufacturing. Number two, the strong focus on trade enforcement. Three, on the skills front. She's already supported, as we were just talking about, a tax credit on apprenticeships, but it needs to be much larger. And I think we have to have a greater movement towards this. You know, I'm not a believer in this idea that you call something college and other things are not college. You know, we need people to be getting advanced skills credentials, and they all are worthy of recognition as college or higher education or learning, and we have got to figure out a better job in our country. We are just not up to snuff, and this would seem like something that would not be that partisan. Being in the private sector a little for the first couple of years of my life, you hear it everywhere. But we need more we need businesses and companies to work on more credentials. I think one of the things that frustrated Barack Obama forever was people saying, we can't find this or that type of worker. And the president's like, well, hold it. I'm going all these places and seeing people looking for jobs. You need to let us know what are the exact credentials so that somebody in San Diego can go to a community college and get that credential and know that that job opening in Pittsburgh or St. Louis will recognize that. And that cannot be done by either government or industry alone. That has to be a greater work. We worked more on the credentialing for people coming out of the military, but it needs to be broader. And I think we need to have much more union partnerships on the manufacturing side, on the training. And I think the hard part is we need to figure out, as we're focusing on higher education, on debt-free college, on more funding, how we can fund more of the higher level skills, credential, job-specific, on-the-job training that is helping people get to the places, the people who need jobs, to the places that need workers, and to find a way to have funding that does not lead to waste or abuse. And so it's really got to be, again, how do we find a way of opening up the flows of resources in ways that do not lead to some of the problems, and we've seen many problems in the for-profit college area. So we've got to raise the bar for the standards. And I think, and this is me speaking, I don't know if the campaign spoke about it, but you know, this entire idea that your training depends on somebody determining how you lost a job just makes no sense. If you lose a job, you need something, you need a certain amount of help. Now, the resistance is that whenever somebody wants to generalize it, they say, oh, let's take the benefits the trade adjustment system has and level it down so everybody can get it. And I think that's backwards. We need to level up. You need a type of serious training, location, credential, skill, at income support if needed, and it should be for everyone. And there should be more of a push that we should be trying to get this right, and if we can get it right, that it is worth it to us as a country for the safety net, for humanitarian reasons, but for economic reasons as well, to invest more, because I think the return will be high. It's got to be resources with accountability. We have to figure it out together, but this really should be one of the hidden agenda items for our country going forward. So that's number 3. Number 4, tax policy. You know, it just flows from what we just discussed. Tax policy needs to focus not just on, it needs to focus on location. You know, I mean, I know the saying is what's good for GM is good for the country and vice versa. Well, you know, what's good for a GM that invests in jobs and innovation in the United States is good for the country. But we need to focus towards the intersection of activities that do have the innovation spillover effects. It is not one's job just to benefit a company because they have a post box here. It is to benefit them doing more job creation and innovation and research on our shores. And our tax policy must reflect that. And there needs to be a very serious effort. And I think ensuring manufacturing location and the incentives for manufacturing location needs to be near the top. Now, I know there's a lot of different ways of doing that. And, you know, Secretary Clinton has definitely put in some tough measures, too. She's put in a clawback proposal, which suggests that a company that gets tax benefits because of their innovation spillover benefits can't just pick up and leave all sorts of negative externalities to a place where they've had an implicit contract, and that it can make sense to claw back and make sure that some of those benefits now go to helping that community. Fifth, infrastructure. Infrastructure is obviously extremely important for our competitiveness, for our productivity, for just being a responsible country that deals with its deferred maintenance, but there is no question that it will make the Buy America provisions more important in our country. It will be good for manufacturing. It will be good for tightening labor markets and wages, and I think will go hand in hand with a stronger manufacturing policy. And then finally, I think we have to have more of a preventative strategy in our country, particularly as it relates to manufacturing communities, which is we as a country do, let me this way, a lot of smart economic policy is about preventing downward cycles that you can't stop. Bankruptcy is a provision to stop the negative cycle of creditors destroying a company or people that might still be able to add value. You put in stimulus or money to prevent the economy weakening demand from spiraling down. We have lots of policies that do this. We are totally inadequate at the community level when there is a major hit to a major industry. We just sit there and watch. We watch the community spiral down. We watch the revenue base go down. Then we watch the social service needs go up as more people need help. We watch social conditions, health conditions go down. And then if the community gets poor enough, then it's maybe eligible for some programs that are designed for low-income areas. That is a terrible strategy. And it goes to even on trade enforcement as well. There's quite a bit of waiting to a significant amount of harm has already happened. So I think when we look at manufacturing, we have got to have strategies that allow people to take action. I think if you have adjustment strategies, they don't come after your unemployment sank at a certain level. You should be able to apply and get assistance at the sniff that a major plant is going down that a community relies on. Jennifer Granholm would call me when I was on the auto task force and say, I'm going to go see CEO X of a Fortune 500 company. We have beautiful locations on the water that are standing still in Detroit. I have nothing to offer them. Nothing. There's no tax incentive. There's no anything that's going to help. We shouldn't do that. So when we talk about this kind of suite of tax cuts that we call the manufacturing renaissance tax cuts, they are designed a bit so that the next Jennifer Granholm can come and say, we are seeing a downturn, this is going to close, this is a beautiful property, here is a significant tax incentive for repurposing, here is a significant equity return or zero capital gains if you want to come in now. And I think that needs to go from the workers, et cetera. I think one of the worst things we've seen in our country constantly is the community gets hit. the downward cycle starts, the community becomes less attractive to invest in, and it just cycles down. And we just and I sit there and you watch that at the end of you'd see some of that in the end of the 90s, even with the economy so great, and then you come right back to the White House 9 years later, and you've got the governor of Michigan calling with the same thing, and you just wonder, at what point are we going to develop policies that don't wait till you're at the bottom of the downward cycle before we're willing to intervene and help? So with that, I thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience in things I've repeated that other people have said and didn't know about. And thank you for keep watching West Wing, because we do get those green checks with the residuals. So thank you.
Thank you, Gene.